So here we are again for Community Conversations. Today we have Dawn from Upward Facing Dawn. I'm Michelle from JID. Thanks for coming today, Dawn.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for organizing this.
Yeah, Zoom seems to be the way we're organizing most things these days, which is what we were talking about the other day.
Yeah, it's everywhere for everything.
It changes the way I teach as a teacher, and it changes how I show up as a student, I'm finding.
For sure. For sure. I just saw something this morning that part of the Connected Yoga Teacher group, they were asking, what online courses have you really been engaged in and what made them so compelling? And it's always the teacher for me. Always the teacher, whether it's live and in person or online. When you have a teacher that you like in person, hopefully it translates to online, but it may not. You never know.
I think I'm finding myself challenged by just accepting that this is normal now. This is the way it has to be now. Nothing about it is normal.
Yeah.
And then accepting that, and then figuring out how I move within that, how I show up for that, and everything is new. So I don't know what is my best choice right now. It's almost like it takes me more energy to find what is my highest good choice, because everything feels different now.
Yes. Yeah. And how much energy do I have to make my highest good choice? Some days more than others. Yeah, and when you're holding a class, when it's virtual, it's not like holding space when you're there in person. When you're there in person, you're kind of like sending out this space and it bounces back to you. But when it's virtual, it's like, hello. It just goes out and out. And hopefully it's resonating. It's hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. I didn't necessarily think about sort of that there is an energetic bubble in the room when you're all together, right? And I suppose maybe virtually there is one too. I just don't know what it feels like exactly yet.
A lot of my online teaching is for teacher training. And so, you've got various levels of I'm using mute, I'm not using mute, I'm not sure what mute is for, cats walking across screens, and kids busting in doorways. And it's really, really interesting because energetically people come to class with all of these things that populate their lives and their minds and their concerns. But when you are having these face-to-face conversations online, all of these concerns are like popping up like Muppets here and there. It's interesting.
I find, especially with my Choose Yourself classes, that in studio are very interactive and there's a lot of dialogue. That's much harder to do virtually because of the mute and the unmute. And
yeah,
when people start talking at the same time, it's different than in the studio, and it takes longer to reset and start over.
Yeah, and people feel bad. My students, I find, ask less questions.
Yeah, I have to structure it differently, and I have to be more active about I can't leave sort of a hanging question.
Yeah, shifting towards structure. So you ask a question and you tell them that here's some time for you to just jot some notes. You're going to have this much time to respond if you wish to respond, and then you give everybody their time.
Yeah, and I guess for me as a teacher, I tend to be more organic than that. I tend to not be as structured. I definitely am a go with the flow kind of a teacher. Like, where are you today? Let's meet you where you're at.
Yeah, and leaving space, like that, holding space, but also just letting the question hang there for a while to see, are they going to do it? Will they participate? You can see the thoughts forming on their face, and you know that they have something to say, and you just wait. That's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. I had one of my friends tell me, she came to one of the classes and she said it was a kind of class that she normally wouldn't have signed up for. But because it was virtual and because she could have her camera off, and because it wasn't an asana class or anything where I needed to see anybody, she could have her camera off and she could be muted most of the time if she wanted to be. Like, that was very comfortable for her, and she got way more out of that class than she expected to, and she showed up where she wouldn't have before. So I'm just finding all of these conversations I'm having with people very interesting that I wouldn't have maybe thought of before.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be opening some doors too. Like, not only do we have more time, a lot of us, uh, and people are showing up for things that are not necessarily in their wheelhouse.
I guess I maybe don't fully have clarity around what does this look like for a student, as a student, as it from teacher to student perspective, and then from student to teacher, like those, they're both sides of that I'm experiencing right now. I do better when I'm in a space with other people.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, learning, I just work better that way. And this feels, I'm going to say, less than for me personally.
Yeah, that also stopped me from offering stuff online, because it felt impossible to offer what I do in person, which I'm very honored to do and very proud of what I have to offer. I don't want to put out something that's less than what I can do. And I started, and it doesn't feel the same, but the response from people is, thank you, this is much needed, and never, it's not quite like when you're really here, because we all know it's not going to be that. So that's good.
I've definitely had to face some of my tendencies towards perfectionism, I'll say.
At a certain point, though, done is better than perfect. Because then you can learn and keep growing. It's funny, I always tell my kids that we learn more from the things that we try and fail at than the things that we try and we're automatically really good at. But we're human, so we want to do the things that we feel like we're good at. One of my favorite writing inspirations is Anne Lamott, and she says all the time that the way that you get over the fear of starting or writer's block is that you just start putting words on paper. She likens it to shoveling sand into a box. First, you're just putting the sand in the box, get all the sand in the box, and then you can start making a sandcastle, right? So maybe my first couple online classes were sand in a box. And now we can start making a sandcastle.
Yeah, I think there's a learning curve. Absolutely. And I think, starting, you just have to start.
But it's the same on the other side as a student. Like, you come in and you have to have the energy to carry yourself through, to pay attention and be present, because you're just not getting the same level of energy that you do when you're in person.
Yeah, I did find, I actually wrote a blog about this. I kind of forgot about it until you just said that. I actually found a personal, like, major blessing in the virtual world. I talked to the teacher before I went to the class because I wanted to make sure she was okay with it. But it was one of those days. I'll just say that I knew that there was a very good likelihood that I was going to have an emotional release during the yoga class. And so I asked if it would be okay if I kept my camera and my mic off, and I did my practice. Like, I knew I needed the guidance, but I also knew I needed to let go. And she graciously said that was fine and did the practice, and literally was able to have an emotional release on my mat, tears flowing, sobbing happening. And I wasn't interrupting the class in any way, shape, or form, right? But I was still present in that class with that community. And even though I was alone, I felt very supported, and nobody even knew that I was having that moment.
Pressure valves, we have them.
Yeah.
I have a couple sisters who don't do yoga, and they're just not for them, which is fine, but we all had this tendency through our teens, 20s, even into our 30s, where if there was any high emotion at work, we'd find ourselves crying. And so we'd commiserate with each other, because there's nothing worse than being in a really serious work situation where you get so frustrated or, you know, fired up about something that you start crying. I don't do that anymore because I have regular moments in my life, in my day, where there's like pressure release, grounding, calming, so that firestorm doesn't come up with every little, you know, spike in emotion, which is really kind of nice.
Yeah, there's a processing that's happening kind of on the continual. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, yeah, because you have your practice for sure. I was just talking about this with Bethany, actually. We were talking about sort of my center is well, the pendulum that happens, you know,
Mhm.
is much, it doesn't go as far anymore. It doesn't move as fast anymore. It's not to say I'm always centered, but it just doesn't move as much. And so it's easier to get back to it. And sometimes that is just an emotional release on a yoga mat and then I'm good. Whereas 6 years ago, I have an emotional release on a yoga mat and that lasts for weeks, maybe months of me trying
Right?
to internalize it and figure out what it was from and try and get out of the funk. And, you know, I'm so grateful for the tools that take me out of that so much faster now.
Yay. And sharing them online.
Yeah. Yes. And you were a big part of that. Thanks for joining me today, Dawn. It was great speaking with you, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Thanks, Michelle. Anytime. Talk to you soon.
Bye.